Imagine a routine night shift that turns into a scene straight out of a nightmare. A patrol car pulls over a vehicle only to reveal a young boy behind the wheel and a baby crying uncontrollably in the back seat. What desperate circumstances led to this shocking moment? And how will one officer's unwavering determination change the course of these young lives forever? Watch the full video to uncover the mystery behind a decision made in the blink of an eye, where heartache meets courage and hope is found in the most unexpected place. Night fell over the quiet outskirts of Salt Springs, bathing the mostly empty roads in the pale glow of streetlights. Ansel Whitmore, a seasoned police officer with over a decade of night shift patrols under his belt, was behind the wheel of his cruiser. The lull of a seemingly uneventful shift weighed on him, and he found himself scanning the silent streets with a mixture of vigilance and fatigue. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, until he spotted headlights flickering up ahead, bobbing in a strange, unsteady rhythm. The vehicle appeared to drift momentarily between lanes, as though the driver were trying to control a restless beast on the verge of breaking free. Ansel leaned forward, narrowing his eyes at the sight. Most reckless drivers he encountered were speeding, but this car moved slowly and erratically, which made his instincts flare. Without a second thought, he switched on the cruiser's emergency lights and sounded a short burst of the siren. The driver hesitated, swerving to the right before finally coming to an unsteady stop on the shoulder. Ansel took a calming breath, reminding himself that not every odd stop led to a dangerous criminal. Yet something in the pit of his stomach told him this encounter would be different. He stepped out, hand hovering near his holster, not because he expected violence, but because old habits told him to stay prepared. As he approached, the beam of his flashlight revealed a small silhouette behind the steering wheel. At first, Ansel thought it might be a teenager who'd stolen a family car for a late-night joyride. But as he came closer, the figure behind the wheel looked even younger than he'd expected, maybe 12 or 13 at most. The boy's eyes were huge in the reflection of the flashlight, filled with a mix of dread and desperation. Ansel felt his heart constrict, a paternal concern rising in his chest. That alone would have been alarming enough, but then he caught sight of something else, a baby, red-faced and wailing, strapped into a car seat in the back. For a second, Ansel couldn't speak. He had seen plenty of shocking scenes, accidents, thefts, even violent crimes, but this made him swallow hard. Carefully, he knocked on the window, motioning for the boy to roll it down. When the glass slid open, the wails of the baby became piercing, echoing into the night. The boy's hands shook on the steering wheel, knuckles turning white. Ansel tried to keep his voice steady as he introduced himself, but he could hear the tremor of concern beneath the practiced authority. "Son, everything all right in there?" he asked quietly, though the question felt inadequate. The boy gulped and looked back at the screaming infant with eyes brimming with tears. He struggled for a moment to speak, the words catching in his throat as though he feared any admission might get him into deeper trouble. Ansel recognized the telltale signs of panic in the boy's stiff posture, so he softened his tone. "Take your time, kiddo. I just need to know what's going on. Let's start with your name." The boy whispered, "Cyrus. Cyrus Malroy." In that brief reply, Ansel could almost taste the fear and responsibility heaped on such young shoulders. Before he could ask another question, the baby's cries rose to an urgent pitch, and Ansel sensed this was more than a simple case of underage driving. Something truly alarming must have driven a kid to take the wheel, especially with a tiny infant shrieking in the back. As the night pressed in around them, Ansel realized he stood at the edge of a situation both heartbreaking and urgent, one that would soon test every ounce of compassion, courage, and resourcefulness he possessed. Ansel took a measured breath and tried to steady the flurry of thoughts in his mind. He crouched slightly to meet Cyrus at eye level through the car window, conscious that an overly stern approach could frighten the boy even more. The wails from the infant in the back seat cut through the still night, creating a sense of urgency that gripped Ansel's every nerve. He gently asked if it was safe for him to open the door, and Cyrus nodded, tears starting to form in the corners of his eyes. As Ansel eased the door open, he could see the boy's knuckles still white against the steering wheel, too petrified to let go. In a soft voice, Ansel coaxed Cyrus into shifting the gear to park and turning off the ignition. The moment the rumble of the engine died, the car seemed to shrink around them, and the baby's cries amplified even more. Ansel leaned in to get a clear look at the infant. The tiny face was red, mouth open in a heart-wrenching wail. There were no obvious injuries that Ansel could see, but something about that cry signaled more than just hunger or a need for a diaper change. It held a raw desperation, a plea for help. He turned his attention back to Cyrus, who sat rigid and trembling, clearly at a loss. Ansel placed a reassuring hand on Cyrus's shoulder. The boy's thin frame trembled under his uniformed palm. "Hey, it's all right," Ansel said quietly. "We'll figure this out. Can you tell me who the baby is?" For a moment, Cyrus just stared, fear battling the instinct to protect his little passenger at all costs. Finally, he swallowed and mumbled that this was his baby brother, Dashiell, only 6 months old, in pain for most of the evening and inconsolable for hours. Their mother was gone, he managed to say in a voice thick with sorrow, and no one else was around to drive them to the hospital. Cyrus had tried calling his father's phone, but it just rang, and the panic over his brother's anguished cries had pushed him into doing the one thing he never imagined he would: climb behind the wheel himself. Hearing this, Ansel felt anger flare, not at Cyrus, but at a situation where a 13-year-old boy shouldered so much responsibility that he was risking everything to save his baby brother. Suppressing the surge of emotions, he told Cyrus to take a few breaths while he checked on Dashiell. The infant's cries barely let up, and Ansel gently placed 2 fingers on the baby's forehead, noting it felt overly warm. "We need to get him looked at right away," Ansel said decisively. He radioed dispatch, requesting medical support at their location, then assured Cyrus that he wouldn't abandon them. Even as the swirling lights of his cruiser painted shadows on the asphalt, Ansel knew this was only the start of what might be a harrowing night, but he vowed, silently, to see it through for both of these children who had already been dealt more hardship than they deserved. Ansel stayed close by Cyrus's side as they waited for the ambulance to arrive, the rotating lights of the patrol car casting shifting shadows across the pavement. The night air felt thick with tension, and every passing moment seemed to amplify Dashiell's distress. Cyrus hovered over the car seat, gently stroking his brother's arm in a desperate attempt to soothe him. Ansel could see the young boy's exhaustion in the slump of his shoulders and the hollow look in his eyes. He asked whether there was anyone else, perhaps a neighbor, a friend, who could come to help. Cyrus shook his head in silence, fighting back tears. Ansel pressed for more details, his voice quiet so as not to overwhelm the already frantic teenager. Little by little, the story emerged. Their mother had died only a month prior, leaving both boys in the care of their father, Ryder, whose own life had been spinning into chaos ever since the funeral. He'd disappear for days on end, coming home sporadically with empty promises of finding steady work. In the meantime, Cyrus had become the sole caregiver for Dashiell, feeding him formula and trying to manage a household he was far too young to run alone. Earlier that evening, Dashiell's cries had turned frantic. Cyrus guessed it was something more than simple hunger or a dirty diaper, but he had no clue how to handle an infant's prolonged screams. With no phone numbers left to call and his father missing yet again, he made a snap decision. He took the keys from a side table and drove out, hoping to get his brother to a hospital or at least find someone who could help. It wasn't long before the distant whine of an ambulance grew louder, and relief flooded Ansel's chest. He guided the paramedics over to the car, explaining briefly how he'd found the 2 children. They examined Dashiell with swift efficiency, measuring his temperature and checking for any sign of injury or illness that required immediate intervention. The little boy's face was crimson and wet with tears, but one of the medics noted that he wasn't showing obvious signs of severe distress such as labored breathing. He seemed more likely to be suffering from a painful colic or infection that needed medical treatment, but not necessarily emergency surgery. Cyrus listened with trembling lips as the paramedics reassured him they'd take Dashiell to the emergency department for a thorough checkup. Ansel glanced at the squad car, then back at the ambulance. He wasn't about to leave these kids in the dark, not after seeing how desperately they needed an adult's intervention. He told the paramedics he'd follow them to the hospital, and he promised Cyrus he wouldn't disappear until they had answers. The boy's expression, equal parts heartbreak and cautious hope, lingered in Ansel's mind, a stark reminder that some wounds reached well beyond physical injuries. Together, they carefully moved Dashiell's car seat into the ambulance, securing it properly before Cyrus climbed in beside him. Ansel made sure to radio dispatch about the situation, emphasizing the urgent need for Child Protective Services to be involved as soon as possible. As he returned to his patrol car and switched on the engine, he felt a surge of determination. He might not be a social worker or a family counselor, but he knew that what Cyrus and Dashiell faced went far beyond one night's crisis. They were alone, frightened, and weighed down by more responsibility than any children should have to bear. He followed the ambulance down the quiet suburban roads, streetlights flashing across his windshield as he contemplated how quickly a routine traffic stop had spiraled into something profoundly human and raw. At that late hour, the streets were nearly deserted, and a heavy stillness seemed to press in on both vehicles. Ansel gripped the steering wheel tightly, thinking back to the moment he first saw the boy behind the wheel and the crying baby in the back. He hadn't just stumbled upon a minor infraction, he had stumbled upon two lives teetering on the brink, one heartbreak away from tragedy. When the hospital came into view, its fluorescent lights illuminating the surrounding parking lot, Ansel felt a flicker of relief. At least Dashiell would soon be in capable hands. Yet he knew medical care was only part of the solution. There remained the question of how these two children would cope once they were discharged, and where their elusive father had gone. Shaking off the uneasy feeling that there were no simple answers, Ansel parked and hurried inside, determined to keep his promise to Cyrus, that he wouldn't let them face this terrifying ordeal alone. Ansel followed the paramedics through a set of automatic doors that led into the brightly lit emergency department. The sterile scent of disinfectant immediately filled his nostrils, and the steady hum of overhead fluorescent lights provided an unsettling contrast to the hush of the late hour. Cyrus walked beside him, clutching Dashiell's baby carrier as though it were the only solid thing in a world that had otherwise spun out of control. Despite the chaotic undercurrent of beeping machines and hushed medical staff conferring behind counters, the young boy's focus never wavered from his infant brother. A nurse wearing pastel scrubs guided them to a small alcove lined with curtains. Within moments, Dashiell was placed on an examination table. His cries, though still piercing, had subsided into exhausted whimpers. Cyrus, unsure of what to do, hovered at the edge of the curtain, glancing anxiously at Ansel for some sign of reassurance. Ansel gave him a slight nod, silently promising he wasn't about to leave. Meanwhile, a doctor arrived, a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Lawson, and began checking Dashiell's vital signs and asking Cyrus gentle yet pointed questions. How long had Dashiell been crying like this? Did he have any known medical conditions? When was the last time he'd eaten? Cyrus, voice trembling, did his best to answer. Ansel stood close enough to catch fragments of Dr. Lawson's thoughts, likely a gastrointestinal issue, perhaps an infection, but more tests were needed to confirm. She spoke calmly, explaining that they would run a few quick diagnostics to rule out anything serious. All the while, Cyrus clenched the handle of Dashiell's car seat, his fingers bloodless from the tight grip. Ansel sensed how desperately the boy longed for an adult to solve everything. Yet, the absence of any family member beside Cyrus was glaring, and Ansel's heart twisted at the weight the child carried. A hospital social worker arrived shortly after, summoned by the emergency staff who suspected a deeper story behind two minors appearing alone at this hour. She introduced herself as Ms. Delacroix, her kind eyes taking in Cyrus's frazzled condition and Ansel's uniformed presence. Pulling the officer aside for a moment, she quietly explained that they would typically initiate an investigation if no legal guardian could be reached. Ansel nodded, filling her in on what he knew, the death of the children's mother, the father's erratic absence, and Cyrus's desperation that led him to drive illegally to the hospital. Ms. Delacroix's face grew increasingly grave as she listened. She asked Ansel if he had any idea where Ryder, the boy's father, might be found or if there were relatives in the area who could step in. Ansel admitted he didn't have those answers yet. He promised he would run a check through police databases in hopes of locating the father or any extended family. In the meantime, Ms. Delacroix suggested that protective services might arrange temporary shelter for the boys if the father remained missing. Ansel felt a surge of protectiveness for Cyrus, who, moments earlier, had collapsed into a plastic chair, fighting back tears while listening to Dashiell's weak cries. Back inside the curtained alcove, Cyrus anxiously watched Dr. Lawson administer a soothing treatment to his brother, hoping to alleviate what appeared to be severe colic or an underlying infection. The doctor gently explained that the infant would likely need an overnight stay for observation. At the sound of that, Cyrus pressed his lips together, as though steeling himself for yet another night alone in a strange place without any adult to lean on, except for Ansel, a stranger in a police uniform who had unexpectedly become their sole source of help. Determined to keep his word, Ansel placed a hand lightly on Cyrus's shoulder. "I'm going to do whatever I can," he said softly, mindful that too many promises could prove hollow if they couldn't locate the father. But in that moment, Cyrus's red-rimmed eyes seemed to register gratitude, a flicker of hope that maybe, at last, someone was willing to shoulder the burden with him. Ansel left the cubicle briefly to speak with the hospital staff, fully aware that the boy's problems went far beyond medical care. Tomorrow, or even later this same night, would bring a deluge of paperwork, phone calls, and decisions that neither Cyrus nor Dashiell were equipped to face alone. Yet as the walls of the busy ER closed in around them, Ansel resolved that at least, for now, these children wouldn't have to face the storm by themselves. Ansel stepped out into the bustling corridor of the ER, the steady beep of machines and the shuffle of hurried footsteps echoing around him. Nurses steered gurneys past the open triage desks, and distant voices carried overhead, calling for doctors or requesting supplies. Amid this current of activity, Ansel made his way to a quieter corner, pulled out his phone, and dialed the station. He needed every piece of information they could gather on Ryder Malroy, the missing father. A colleague on the other end of the line promised to run a background check and check local precincts to see if Ryder had been arrested or admitted to another hospital. Yet the officer's tone suggested he was bracing Ansel for bad news. Ryder's record hinted at a troubled history that might explain his extended absence. The minute Ansel hung up, Ms. Delacroix, the hospital social worker, approached, her expression both empathetic and resolute. She had heard no word on any immediate family willing or able to care for the two boys. Their father was officially listed as next of kin, but with him unaccounted for, the boys were effectively alone. Ansel hesitated. He'd encountered plenty of cases where children were placed in foster care on short notice, but Cyrus's desperate actions and profound responsibility for Dashiell tugged at something deep within him. There was a fierce protectiveness growing inside him that he hadn't quite felt before, an urge to ensure these children didn't slip through the cracks of a system that didn't always guarantee happy endings. He returned to the curtained alcove to find Cyrus perched beside Dashiell's bassinet, eyes ringed with fatigue. Dr. Lawson confirmed that Dashiell would need a night of observation, possibly more if testing revealed an infection. Cyrus's shoulders sagged, as though the weight of the world pressed on them, yet he clutched Dashiell's tiny hand with unwavering devotion. Ansel gently relayed the limited information he'd managed to glean, no immediate news on Ryder's whereabouts, but the search was ongoing. He assured Cyrus that Ms. Delacroix and the hospital staff would keep Dashiell safe while they figured out a plan. Still, the boy's worried expression showed he was all too aware that his family's problems stretched beyond a single hospital stay. Seeing the tears that threatened to spill from Cyrus's eyes, Ansel placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I'm not leaving tonight," he promised. "I'll stay here as long as they'll let me. Then we'll figure out your next steps." Cyrus nodded, his voice lost for a moment in the hum of the ER. He had grown used to people vanishing from his life, his mother taken by illness, his father absent in a haze of uncertainty, and the cautious hope sparked by Ansel's kindness warred with the fear that this, too, might be temporary. Outside Dashiell's alcove, Ms. Delacroix listened to Ansel's vow and offered him a faint, appreciative smile. She'd witnessed plenty of painful stories in these halls, many without resolution. Something in her gaze suggested a certain relief, an acknowledgement that perhaps these boys had finally crossed paths with someone who wouldn't slip away at the first sign of red tape. Yet both she and Ansel understood the seriousness of the night's revelations. No matter what supportive hand they tried to extend, Cyrus and Dashiell still faced an uphill battle, the outcome riding heavily on whether or not their father could be found, and on whether he was even in any shape to take care of them if he turned up. The night slowly deepened as Ansel returned to the busy corridor of the hospital, his mind still churning with worry for Cyrus and little Dashiell. The incessant beeping of monitors and murmured conversations of doctors and nurses filled the air, but Ansel's focus was singular. He needed to learn more about Ryder Malroy, the elusive father whose absence had forced a young boy to take on far too much responsibility. Retreating to a quiet corner near the nurse's station, Ansel pulled out his phone and dialed the dispatch line once again. His voice was low, determined as he reiterated the case details. The dispatcher confirmed that their preliminary search had yielded a few leads, though nothing concrete yet. Ryder's record, muddled by past run-ins with the law and a history of erratic behavior, offered only hints: a recent sighting in a rundown neighborhood on the city's outskirts, a vague report of him being near an abandoned warehouse district, and even a possible connection with a local gang known for recruiting vulnerable individuals. Each detail added a layer of urgency to the situation. Ansel's jaw tightened as he absorbed the implications. The father might be in real danger, or worse, entangled with people who could hurt him, and by extension, his own children. Meanwhile, inside the examination room where Dashiell was now resting under the careful watch of Dr. Lawson, Ms. Delacroix, the hospital's social worker, sat down with Cyrus. Her gentle, measured tone was intended to soothe, though Cyrus's eyes still glistened with unspoken fears. She explained that while they awaited further test results for Dashiell's infection, arrangements were being made to ensure the children would have a safe place to stay should Ryder remain unreachable. Ms. Delacroix promised that she would file an immediate report to Child Protective Services and that the hospital's case management team was already working with local authorities. Cyrus listened silently, nodding occasionally, as if each word was both a balm and a reminder of the void left by his absent father. In a quiet hallway near the nurse's station, Ansel's thoughts wandered back to the night's events: the sight of a young, trembling boy behind the wheel, the heart-wrenching cries of an infant, and the desperate resolve in Cyrus's eyes. The raw vulnerability of it all spurred him into action. He quickly scanned the dispatch report on his phone and noted that a unit was already en route to follow up on the new tip regarding Ryder's location. Ansel knew he couldn't leave the children's side, yet he also understood that the sooner they located their father, even if only to determine his inability to care for them, the better chance they had at securing a long-term solution. Determined, Ansel made his way back to the entrance of the ER where he found a fellow officer, Officer Marlon Reed, speaking urgently into his radio. Marlon confirmed that a patrol car had been dispatched to the rough district mentioned in the report. Ansel exchanged a brief nod with Marlon, a silent promise passing between them that they would pull every resource available to help these children. The gravity of the situation pressed heavily on Ansel's shoulders as he returned to the small waiting area. There, he found Ms. Delacroix reviewing a file and speaking softly with another hospital staff member about potential temporary foster arrangements. Taking a moment to catch his breath, Ansel sat down beside her. "I'm not leaving until we have some real answers about Ryder," he said firmly, his eyes dark with resolve. Ms. Delacroix offered him a tired but understanding smile. "I know, Officer Whitmore. We all do. I just wish we could do more immediately for these kids," she replied, her voice a mixture of professional concern and genuine compassion. In that brief exchange, both understood that while medical care would ease Dashiell's physical suffering, the emotional scars on both children would require a more comprehensive safety net, one that extended well beyond the sterile confines of the hospital. As minutes turned into an hour, Ansel received intermittent updates through his radio. Each report from the dispatched unit painted a picture of a chaotic, decaying part of town, where the harsh neon lights barely illuminated dark alleys. His heart sank at the thought of Ryder navigating such a dangerous environment. Still, he clung to the hope that a lead, however tenuous, might prompt a breakthrough. At one point, Ansel excused himself briefly to check on Cyrus, who was now dozing fitfully in a plastic chair near the waiting area. The sight of the young boy's fatigued face and the soft hum of his whispered prayers for his brother pierced Ansel's heart. He placed a reassuring hand on Cyrus's shoulder and whispered, "We're doing everything we can, kiddo. You and Dashiell are not alone." Cyrus's eyes fluttered open, meeting Ansel's gaze for a fleeting moment before surrendering to exhaustion once more. Later that evening, just as the corridors began to quiet down again, Ansel's radio crackled with an urgent message from Officer Reed. A unit had found a lead, a description matching Ryder's last known whereabouts near an abandoned industrial complex. Ansel's pulse quickened. Though he knew the lead was far from a confirmation, it was a thread he intended to pull on with every ounce of determination he had. He promised himself that he would personally follow up on this information the moment it was safe to do so, ensuring that no stone would be left unturned in the search for the father who had so long been a missing piece in these children's lives. In the quiet moments that followed, as Ansel sat alone in the dim light of the hospital corridor, he reflected on the bitter irony of the night. A routine patrol had turned into a desperate quest to protect two vulnerable lives. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, not as a duty imposed by law, but as a moral imperative born of empathy and human decency. His thoughts were a mix of determination and concern, for Cyrus, for Dashiell, and for the possibility that if Ryder could be found, he might still have a chance to make things right. Ansel resolved that no matter what obstacles lay ahead, he would see this through. In that small, quiet moment, surrounded by the sterile sounds of the hospital, he vowed to be the steadfast guardian these children desperately needed, even as the night wore on and the search for their father grew ever more urgent. Officer Whitmore spent the early hours of the morning combing through the preliminary report from dispatch, his mind fixed on the new lead regarding Ryder Malroy's whereabouts. The message had come through Officer Reed's radio, an urgent tip indicating that Ryder might have been spotted near an abandoned industrial complex on the city's grimy outskirts. Whitmore's pulse quickened as he reviewed the details: faded witness accounts, a vague description of a man matching Ryder's build, and a location notorious for its rundown warehouses and vacant lots. Determined, he gathered his equipment, a flashlight, his radio, and his police notebook, and informed the hospital's social worker and Ms. Delacroix that he would pursue the lead immediately, promising that he would return with answers. Navigating the city streets in his cruiser, Officer Whitmore drove steadily toward the industrial district. The landscape transformed as he approached. Well-lit suburban neighborhoods gave way to derelict buildings, graffiti-stained walls, and flickering street lamps that struggled to push back the encroaching darkness. The air was thick with the scent of rust and decay. Every so often, he slowed as he passed clusters of boarded-up storefronts and empty lots where weeds sprouted through cracked concrete. His mind was awash with concerns for Cyrus and Dashiell. Their uncertain future now rested not only on his promise to protect them but on the hope that their missing father might yet be found. Pulling up to a large, dilapidated warehouse complex, Whitmore parked his cruiser in a shadowed lot. He stepped out into the cool night air, the sound of his boots echoing on the cracked pavement. His eyes adjusted slowly to the dim lighting as he surveyed the area. The complex was silent except for the distant hum of an old generator and the occasional clatter of loose metal in the wind. Whitmore's instincts urged caution. He knew that abandoned industrial zones were often havens for illicit activity. Gripping his flashlight tightly, he proceeded on foot, moving stealthily between stacks of discarded machinery in rusted shipping containers. As he made his way deeper into the complex, Whitmore noticed signs of recent human presence: a faint, acrid smell of cigarette smoke, footprints in the dust, and a hastily discarded newspaper fluttering near a broken window. He paused at a small cluster of containers marked with peeling company logos, his training and intuition both alerting him that this might be the scene of the tip. He radioed in for backup, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. "This is Officer Whitmore. I'm at the northwest corner of the complex. I have a possible sighting on a subject matching Ryder Malroy's description. Requesting immediate assistance. While waiting for reinforcements, Whitmore combed the area with careful steps. His eyes caught a glimpse of a dark figure slipping behind a row of stacked crates. Whitmore's heart pounded as he moved silently, creeping forward until he could see the man more clearly. The figure was hunched over, his face partially obscured by shadows and a tattered baseball cap. For a moment, Whitmore's breath caught. This man could well be Ryder. Approaching with measured caution, he called out softly, "Ryder Malroy? This is Officer Whitmore. I need you to come out with your hands visible." There was a long pause. The man stiffened, and then slowly, as though surrendering to inevitability, he emerged from behind the crates. Under the weak glow of a flickering overhead light, Whitmore studied the man's face, a gaunt, troubled expression, eyes downcast and hesitant. The man's clothes were disheveled, and his hands trembled slightly. It was not an image of a proud father, but rather that of someone worn down by hardship and regret. Whitmore kept his tone calm but firm as he moved closer. "Ryder, I know you've been through a lot, but these boys need you. We're here to help, not to hurt you." The words seemed to hang in the cold night air. Ryder's eyes darted away, and for a long moment, silence reigned. Then, his voice came out in a ragged whisper, I'm sorry, I never meant to leave them alone." In that raw, vulnerable exchange, Officer Whitmore sensed that the man before him was not a hardened criminal, but a father who had faltered under the weight of his own demons. The tension in the clearing was palpable as Whitmore signaled for backup to approach slowly, ensuring that Ryder felt neither threatened nor cornered. Over the course of the next several minutes, in the presence of additional officers and the soft glow of flashlights, Ryder began to unravel his story, his struggles with addiction, his spiraling descent after a serious accident, and his inability to care for his children despite a deep, lingering love for them. Whitmore listened intently, his expression softening with each word. Though the path ahead would be fraught with legal and personal complications, the officer realized that this encounter was a turning point for everyone involved. By the time the small team escorted Ryder into the waiting cruiser, the atmosphere had shifted from one of confrontation to cautious compassion. Whitmore arranged for Ryder to receive immediate medical attention and counseling, and he promised to keep a close watch on Cyrus and Dashiell until a safe, long-term arrangement could be made. Standing in the harsh neon glow of the industrial district, Officer Whitmore took a moment to reflect on the gravity of the night's events. In the midst of decay and despair, there had been a spark of redemption, a father's broken promise to return, and an officer's unwavering commitment to mend what had been torn apart. As Whitmore drove back toward the hospital, the city lights flickered by, and he allowed himself a brief moment of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, and many challenges still loomed on the horizon. But in that fragile, transformative hour, there was a sense that even the most desperate situations could lead to healing. He resolved to see these children protected and to help Ryder find the strength to reclaim his role as a father. For Officer Whitmore, the night had become more than just another patrol, it was the beginning of a journey toward restoration, where broken lives might yet be pieced together with compassion, second chances, and the steadfast promise of a better tomorrow. In the weeks that followed, a tentative new chapter began to unfold in the lives of Cyrus, Dashiell, and even Ryder, a chapter defined not by the bleakness of that fateful night but by the slow, healing power of second chances. After Ryder was taken into custody and evaluated at the hospital, he was moved to a rehabilitation facility specially designed for individuals in crisis. There, under the careful supervision of medical professionals and counselors, he began the arduous process of recovery. The raw pain of his past mistakes, compounded by addiction and neglect, was confronted head-on in long therapy sessions and nightly reflections. Each day, as he worked to rebuild himself, he clung to the hope that he might someday earn back the trust and love of his children. Back at the hospital, Cyrus and his little brother Dashiell found themselves placed in a temporary foster home arranged by Ms. Delacroix and the local Child Protective Services. The new home was modest yet warm, a small house with faded floral wallpaper and a garden that, despite its simplicity, brimmed with life. The caregivers, gentle and compassionate, quickly formed a bond with the boys. For Cyrus, the transition was bittersweet. Every day reminded him of the long nights spent behind the wheel and the overwhelming responsibility he had shouldered alone. Yet, as he helped his younger brother giggle at silly cartoons on a tablet or watch birds flit by the open window during meals, a fragile smile began to replace the deep lines of worry on his face. Officer Ansel Whitmore remained a steadfast presence in their lives. No longer merely an enforcer of the law, he had become a guardian of hope, a man whose quiet determination and compassionate heart had set the wheels of change in motion. Whitmore visited the foster home regularly, not out of duty alone but out of genuine care for the children. His updates on Ryder's condition and progress, relayed with cautious optimism, were the lifeline Cyrus clung to. Each visit brought new details: Ryder's first steps toward sobriety, his participation in group therapy sessions, and even his heartfelt letters to a counselor, filled with regret and the promise of doing better. One radiant spring afternoon, when the chill of winter had finally receded and sunlight poured in generously, a carefully orchestrated family reunion was arranged at the rehabilitation center. In a quiet conference room with large windows overlooking a blooming courtyard, Ryder, now clean, gaunt, and vulnerable, sat with Cyrus and little Dashiell by his side. The atmosphere was thick with emotion, the weight of separation, the scars of neglect, and the tentative joy of a reunion that had been so painfully long in coming. With tears glistening in his eyes, Ryder spoke in a trembling voice, "I'm so sorry, boys. I have no excuse for abandoning you. I've been a coward, but I promise I'll work every day to be the father you deserve." His words, raw and unpolished, carried the power of genuine remorse and the desire for redemption. Cyrus, eyes wide with both caution and hope, reached out hesitantly and embraced his father. Dashiell, too young to understand every word, responded with a quiet coo as if acknowledging that something good was finally happening. Over the ensuing months, with the guidance of social workers, counselors, and a community that refused to let these children be forgotten, the family began the slow work of healing. Ryder enrolled in a structured rehabilitation program and, with the support of a dedicated case manager, started attending parenting classes. The foster caregivers, who had been instrumental in stabilizing Cyrus and Dashiell's world, worked closely with social services to create a long-term plan. Officer Whitmore continued his visits, checking in not only on the children but also on Ryder's progress, quietly ensuring that no one was left behind in the chaotic aftermath of that terrifying night. In time, the once fractured family found a rhythm. The temporary foster home became a place of joyful routine, breakfast together at a worn dining table, afternoons filled with simple games in a small backyard, and evenings and laughter and tentative conversations replaced silence and fear. The neighborhood, too, began to take notice. A community that had once been indifferent now rallied to support the family. Neighbors offered meals, tutors volunteered to help with schoolwork, and local clergy organized support groups for families in crisis. One clear, sunlit day, as Cyrus and Dashiell played in the garden under the watchful eyes of their foster parents, Ryder arrived at the house with a modest bouquet of wildflowers in hand, a silent apology and a promise of commitment. In that moment, the past seemed to recede into the background, replaced by the palpable, hopeful pulse of new beginnings. Cyrus, now a little older and a lot wiser, looked up at his father with guarded hope, and as Dashiell babbled happily in his arms, the bonds of family began to knit together once more. Officer Whitmore, observing from a respectful distance, allowed himself a rare, contented smile. He had witnessed many dark nights during his career, but this day shone brightly with the promise of redemption, resilience, and the transformative power of compassion. The journey had been long and fraught with sorrow, but in the gentle embrace of a reunited family, there lay the assurance that even the most heartbreaking stories could ultimately lead to healing and a future filled with hope. From my perspective, the ending of this story is a stirring testament to the transformative power of compassion and the resilience of the human spirit. What began as a heart-wrenching, desperate moment, a boy forced to take the wheel and an infant crying out in pain, evolves into a profound journey of redemption and second chances. The story doesn't offer an overly neat resolution, rather, it acknowledges the deep scars left by loss and neglect while illuminating the possibility of rebuilding broken lives. The reunion between the estranged father and his children, mediated by a compassionate officer and supported by a caring community, isn't a fairy tale ending. It's a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, hope can take root. The father's arduous path to recovery and the children's tentative steps toward healing underscore the reality that true redemption requires time, accountability, and unwavering support. For me, this ending speaks to the notion that every shattered life holds the potential to be pieced together with love, resilience, and a little faith in the future, an inspiring, if bittersweet, call to never give up on those who need a second chance.